Hello and welcome. My name is Zafar Iqbal and you are watching the Mojo Story. New Delhi is all decked up to welcome world leaders for the G20 Summit. US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are among the leaders who are arriving in India. A bilateral meeting later in the day is expected between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. You can see on those visuals, President Biden has already left the US and will be arriving in India. Now, President Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, they are not taking part in this summit meeting, although other leaders are coming. Now, Delhi has been adorned with murals, statues, fountains, but there are also restrictions that have been put in place. You can see this is the venue where the meeting is taking place. A big statue of Nataraja has been installed in front of the venue. But as I was saying, there are restrictions put in place in view of this meeting. The New Delhi area has been closed for public and tourists for 3 days, and only emergency services will be allowed. The summit is poised to address significant global challenges against the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that's going on. We have an eminent panel to discuss this summit meeting. We're joined by Lieutenant General Satish Dua, who is the former GOC of the 15 Corps in Kashmir. We're also joined by Manju Seth, former diplomat, and over the course of our discussion, we'll be joined by Shahri Malhotra of the ORF. If I may start with you, Manju Seth, what are the key objectives that India is aiming to achieve? It's the first time India has got its presidency, and all the world leaders, top leaders of the world, will be in India to discuss and deliberate the pressing issues that the nations are facing across the world.
Sorry. Yes, this is definitely, as you mentioned, there are many pressing issues facing the world, and G20, which comprises 75 to 85% of the world economy, will be, focusing on these problems, on these challenges. And as India's focus has been that there should be, since these are global challenges, there have to be global solutions. So since these are the major economies and the major countries of the world will be deliberating, they need to find common solutions. Then only will you will you go forward, including on the economic front, of course, on the climate, every possible energy security, food security, health, infrastructure, digital infrastructure, all the pressing issues facing the world, the divided world right now. These will all be addressed, and they've already, of course, at the various ministerial level, already quite a lot of ground has been covered, and I'm sure already, their outcomes and their solutions have been looked at, but it's the leadership who will decide and finally say okay or not. And then we will have the outcome document, or whatever it will be, whatever form it does take place. So all these pressing issues which are facing the world, and that's why India's theme of Vasudev Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future, and we have to work together. And India, of course, has also said that the global South's voice should be represented in this summit. Yes. I think G20 will, of course, focus on the economic issues foremost, but also on all the other connected issues which I mentioned just now, to find solutions to arrive at mutually agreeable, implementable, solution, including on climate change, financing of the green transition, etc. All these will be pressing issues, and it is expected that they will find some outcomes, positive outcomes on all these issues.
So the key point that you are emphasizing is consensus. Will there be a consensus at the end of the day? Will a joint statement come up, given the fact that India has historically having good relationship with Russia, but it's also close to the West. We're part of the Quad. We've been buying oil from Russia. So could India play that role of a consensus builder in the given geostrategic context. Sherry Malhotra, welcome to the
Welcome
show.
to the
What's
show.
your
What's your
assessment?
assessment?
For having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. You mentioned the joint statement, and I think this is frankly a matter that's on everyone's minds. But I will say that India's G20 presidency has taken place in a very volatile geopolitical context amidst heavy global polarization. The specter of the Ukraine war has loomed large throughout the presidency. So I think achieving a joint communique will possibly be difficult given the many divisions at play. We have to remember that since the Bali summit last year, positions of countries have hardened, the war has progressed. So I think in this sort of geopolitical context, achieving consensus on what language is acceptable in the statement will be difficult. And India will, I would say, push for a statement in line with its focus on finding a solution to the conflict. But having said that, whether we have a joint statement or don't have a joint statement, I don't think that's necessarily the only indicator of success. Things like technical reforms, I would say, are just as important. If India manages to finally adopt the document on the G20 action plan for the SDGs, for instance, that would qualify as success. And throughout the presidency, I would say India's big achievement has been that despite all the security issues plaguing the group, despite the heavy polarization that has taken place, India has managed to retain the G20's focus on issues impacting the global south. And it has ensured that issues of climate change, debt crisis, economic recovery don't fall off the global agenda just because there is a big security issue. So I think a year-long effort shouldn't be judged just on the basis of one final document. But I'd also like to add that, yes, we do live in a very fractured world. But if you look at a lot of the deliberations that took place throughout the year in terms of the engagement groups, for instance, the Think 20, the T20, which I was fortunate to be part of, we actually had a lot of consensus on several issues, including on the subject of multilateral reforms. And, the Think 20 brought together policymakers, academics, think tankers from both the global north and south. And we actually managed to achieve consensus. So I think certainly at the leaders level, at the political level, things are fractured. There are differences. But if you look at members of civil society, there's actually a lot of consensus on various issues that has been achieved.
That's a very
That's a very
important. You can see from those visuals. President Putin. Now, President Putin will not be taking part in this summit meeting. Essentially, it's a platform meant to discuss economic issues, but nevertheless, politics cannot be separated from economy, and that's precisely the reason that perhaps he's not taking part in this meeting, because the conflict, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, will one way or the other come up in those deliberations. It's not just a war between two countries or two blocks. It's disrupted supply chains, and it's brought about an impact across the world. Lieutenant General Satish Dua, how much do you think that's going to impact the overall deliberations in the G20 summit?
Before I come to your question, Zafar, allow me to make a small comment on this G20 itself. I mean, I think it's amazing. I took part in some other discussions where I said this, and I can't sort of hold myself back. I think there have been 17 G20 summit meetings before this. This is the 18th, but there hasn't been one like this. With very skillful and imaginative handling, Indian government has managed to turn this G20 into G120. In fact, 125 countries have actually participated. The way India is becoming very strongly the voice of global South, the way it is sort of encouraging multilateralism, and I could go on and on. Both my esteemed co-panelists have brought out very relevant issues over here. So I just wanted to make this brief comment. Coming to your question about supply chains, which have been disrupted more so in the wake of this war. Well, even Prime Minister Modi has written an article in leading dailies. I read it in Times of India, where he's made three pillars out of it, and one of them, the second one, talks about um, uh, overcoming our weaknesses in our supply chains, meaning thereby that all the
Yeah.
dependence being placed on China, the world has to come out of it. India
Yeah.
will play a large can has a potential to play a large part in it, a big role in it, and not only today as a president of G20, but otherwise as a country, as a manufacturing hub, we have and we've started taking steps towards that. So you are right to say that amongst I mean, like I said, at the expense of reputation, there are three pillars of this. The one is human centric approach. This is what is laid out by the Prime Minister himself. One is human-centric approach, and second is the issue of supply chains, making resilient supply chains, and so this is a very important part of this G20, I would say.
Yes, and also there's talk about the expansion of this group.
Multi-
Manju said the inclusion of the African Union in G20. If that happens, what does it mean for the future of this organization?
I think it'll add already, if you see, it includes the G7 countries, and that's how the other countries, the other emerging leading economies, developing economies became part of it.
Yeah.
Make it the G20 to discuss and focus on economic issues. Now, since we have been promoting, and we think, India thinks, and I think the world should also understand that that Africa is a huge part of the world, and it requires its voice at the table, at all the high tables, I think. So the AU, if it does come in as, say, G21, the 21st member, we already have the EU. Now, EU represents the developed world, so to speak, and AU would represent Africa, which is a significant chunk of the world and world population and world resources, and so it needs to have a say in the deliberations for future. And it's the worst affected. If you see right now, Africa is affected with all the possible challenges, by the global challenges facing the world. It is most affected.
Yeah.
So it'll be a good thing, I feel, if it does come in and be a part of the G20 and contribute substantively to the deliberations. The only slight problem which I foresee would be that AU, while it represents all the countries, the countries themselves are quite disparate and sort of divided in their approach to the world's challenges.
Yeah.
But I think that can be overcome, and it will be a good thing to have the AU on the high table.
Absolutely. Sherry, I was just wondering that there is symbolism and there is substance. Do you think that there is a lot of focus on substance as well, because essentially it's meant to address the food security, the climate problems, and also the debt relief for poor nations? That's one of the problems that many countries across the world are grappling, and invariably they are falling in a debt trap of bigger economies like China.
Yeah, I think, of course, symbolism is present everywhere when it's a G20, but there is certainly substance, because if you look at some of the technical issues that were discussed, as I mentioned, the G20 action plan, the 7-year action plan on accelerating the SDGs will be up for consideration with the leaders now. India has also pushed for digital public infrastructure to be included in the final declaration. Also, I think there's a more concerted, urgent effort to address the first SDG, which is poverty eradication, because countries now acknowledge that not enough has been done on this front. And you mentioned, of course, food security, which is certainly one of the most important issues to discuss. And this issue has really exacerbated during the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine has traditionally been considered a breadbasket, and the Russia-Ukraine, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, for instance, has again been stopped. And even if you look at climate climate change, the question of moving away from fossil fuels and transitioning towards cleaner energy. This is a big issue. It has lacked consensus so far, but I think it's certainly on the agenda during this summit. And we will see if, we have a breakthrough on some of these most important issues. I would say certainly food insecurity and climate change are two of the most important ones.
Yes.
Yes,
Let me tell the
let me
Suki,
tell
to
the
our
Suki.
attempt specifically on the China question. You know, it's rather strange that China takes the driver's seat when it comes to smaller groupings like the BRICS, like the SCO, but here in a bigger group, it just doesn't show that much inclination. Is it that China, if you give it a VIP treatment, then it wants to be a part of those groupings? If it is, it sees itself pitted against the West here, it tries to step back. What's the game here that China is playing?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. I think you said it very correctly. You put it very rightly when you said that in these smaller groupings, China tries to take the driver's seat. But in a big grouping like this, why is she not here? Uh, Whatever may be the reason, whether it is to take the little wind out of the sail of G20, or to, I mean, in so-called, I mean, whether to it is to not embarrass is a strong word, whether it is to make it awkward for India that he is not present over here, or whether it is to avoid meeting with Joe Biden, the US president. It could be so many reasons, or all of them together. But what it clearly brings out is that Xi Jinping is really playing the role of a man-child. He is, if you have a stated aim of replacing US as number one superpower of the world, superpowers or great powers behave maturely. They don't behave like this. You cannot throw tantrums or try and make things awkward. Man up and come to the high table, state your points rather than shy away from it, take backdoor, take tangential entries. So I think that in itself shows that Chinese leadership is certainly not ready for the role, whether or not China is.
Yes, and it's also clear when they have a problem with the Vasundha Kutukam, the main slogan of this. They have a problem with that, and also it's perhaps to lighten the impact of this summit that they try to back it out, again signaling there. But what could be the possible outcome and implication of this summit? Manju said, we don't know whether there will be a joint statement that will come in the end, but clearly it's shown the cloud that India has on the world stage, which is growing by the day, and also an indicator that India could play an important role in the new world order.
Absolutely, but also if I may add to a small point on President Xi Jinping's absence, I think also he would like to avoid, because one of the the Chinese delegation is already objecting to to the point that we and the other countries have put forward about debt restructuring and to lessen the debt of poorer countries, and majority of these countries have been given debt by China. Or have been given loans by China and in that so-called debt trap, and they want a BRI to be mentioned in this. So they're not in the driving seat for the agenda. They're not in that. Yes. So I think that's another reason that he would like to avoid. And of course, with India at the moment, we don't have China and India don't have the best of, are not on the best of terms. And so that would be another reason that he doesn't want to come here. And if India is not going to give him the VIP treatment as mentioned by the general, I think he's going to avoid coming. That's one of the reasons. And of course, a messaging to India that you cannot get, you cannot have it your way all the time. And then coming to, the second part, if you look at the outcomes that we are looking at, I think on all issues, whether we have a joint statement or a joint communique, or we only have a chair summary, as has been in all the ministerial meetings so far, where China and Russia have objected, because the G7 especially are insisting that there should be a mention of the Ukraine war and a kind of castigation of Russia. So I don't think they are going to, allow that. So that will, in a joint statement or a joint communique, India will have to try and see, like we did in Indonesia, if some via media or via statement, middle statement is possible. But I think that remains to be seen. The leaders will decide on that. India, I'm sure, has proposed options, and if those are agreed on, then we could possibly have a joint communique or a joint statement, or we may not have. We may just have a chair summary, but that will not detract from the outcome, agreed outcomes that will eventually emerge out of the G20 summit. And the focus, as mentioned by the other co-panelists and by, which is there in public domain also, that all the objectives, that those should be implementable, solutions have to be found, and each country has to commit to implementing them. That's where I think there has been some problem in the past.
Sherry, Manju says an important point about the PRI. The Chinese, flagship program says in Pakistan, the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. We know the debt trap that Sri Lanka found itself in, and Pakistan, obviously, it's heading in that direction. We exactly don't know what's the fate of the CPEC. On one hand, there is this problem. On the other hand, China is releasing maps. It just doesn't have a problem with India, the Philippines, the Malaysia. They have also raised their concerns. So all these things have added up. And perhaps that's the reason that President Xi is opted out. Because here, if there is one problem area, one country which has lots of issues to talk about, perhaps it may not find itself comfortable in this grouping. And that's precisely the reason that all of those things have added up for him to opt out.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is a leaders' summit, and when a leader chooses not to attend, he's certainly sending some sort of political messaging, some sort of signal. And I will say that this is in fact the first time that Xi Jinping is missing a G20 summit in person.
Yes.
The second time, actually, in 2021, he did miss it when it was the Italian presidency, but that reason was because of the COVID restrictions. But now he's missing it for whatever reason. We really don't know, frankly, because China is an authoritarian state. Most decisions in China take place in secrecy, so we don't really have anything conclusive in terms of why he's missing the summit. All we can do really is speculate. But as you said, India-China ties have frayed in recent years. The map controversy erupted very recently, and perhaps he's trying to play spoiler because India is the host. But yes, China's relations with other countries have soured as well, in countries in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Japan, Vietnam. All of them are now, undergoing their own tense periods with China. And I will say that China also did not attend the East Asia Summit in Indonesia that just took place. So that's also an important point, and perhaps some of this could also do with China's internal problems. We know that the Chinese economy is slowing down at the moment. China also has frayed relations with the United States right now. They are clashing over several issues, including trade, technology, human rights. Even if you look at Europe, the European Union countries like Germany, who trade heavily with China, even they are now recalibrating their approaches in dealing with China. And the BRICS was mentioned. I think the fact that Xi Jinping prioritized the BRICS summit so much, he was a rather dominant figure in Johannesburg, and you contrast that now with his absence at the G20 summit, and perhaps China sees the BRICS as more relevant for itself today, given that it's a bloc of emerging countries, and it doesn't want to partake so much now in forums that are somewhat still Western led. And frankly, I think China's absence at the G20 summit is really China's loss. It also misses out on an opportunity to conduct bilateral meetings with important leaders like Joe Biden. So I think we should focus on people who are actually coming to the summit as much as we are focusing on people who are missing the summit.
So let's focus on the people who are coming on the summit.
Can I make a small point, Zafar?
Yes.
What Sherry said in the end leads to a good point. That if, let's say, Xi Jinping was here, a lot of focus would have been on bilaterals between him and Joe Biden, maybe between him and Prime Minister Modi and a few other China could have pull asides or meetings with others. So a lot of focus would have gone on this. Whereas now, I think he's doing us a favor by not being here. I say it half in jest, because he's doing us a favor, because the whole
Right.
focus will now remain on G20 and the vibrant kind of G20 that India is able to manage this whole year.
So, Lieutenant General Satish Dua, I wanted to ask you that let us focus on those who are coming. Now, President Biden will be in India, and he's have a one-on-one meeting with the Prime Minister.
Yes.
A bilateral meeting. So far, according to our understanding, it's been a buyer-seller relationship. India has been buying military equipment from America. But now there is a talk of transfer of technology, particularly the jet technology. Do you think that this relationship is going from strength to strength? And perhaps America does not do it with other countries, the transfer of technology, as is being said about India now, and this could be a move forward in that direction.
Absolutely. In fact, I caught somewhere in the news that today, I think today only, the delegations are meeting. That is before the G20 meetings tomorrow.
Yeah.
The Indian and American delegations are meeting, and we are going to press on with that purchase of 31 Predator drones, which had already been in the works for some time. Then the aviation engine that you mentioned, the G414 engine, which we are going to use for our light combat aircraft Tejas, which has been agreed to that it will be produced in India with transfer of technology to India. Now, that is a big thing. No one hands over hot technologies to another country. So that really shows our strategic partnership coming of age, because we lack that technical know-how for an engine of that class, which is 100 plus kilonewtons. So I think these and some other deals that are in the works, the defense deals, because we must remember that the defense buyer-seller relation, and the strategic partnership that is going on, especially which has increased in the last 1 decade, is one of the big pillars on which Indo-US relationship is hinging on. So I think, yes, while it's not a part of G20, but their delegation and their summit level meetings that will take place between India and US will certainly ease out the process which has already been set into motion.
And that's a very strong indicator of the bilateral relationship between America and India. Of course, it's primarily an economic summit meant to discuss economic issues, but nevertheless, there are other things that are definitely going to come up, and this could be one of them. But nevertheless, we'll keep our focus on the G20 summit that's taking place in India as world leaders start arriving. For now, we'll have to leave it here. Thanks so much for joining us, Sherry Malhotra, Lieutenant General Satish Dua, and Manju Seth. We'll keep a track of the story. For now, thanks for joining, and thanks for watching the story.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.